Good? Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. I'm Captain Ron Gallivis, Chief Public Information Officer for the Indiana State Police, and welcome to the Indiana State Police Post here in Indianapolis. This evening, you're going to hear from two individuals, Superintendent Doug Carter and Lieutenant Jeff Herron, who's going to provide information relative to police action shooting resulting in the death of Dreasjon Reed. Please understand that the information that's going to be provided is factual in nature. It was the information that was developed during the course of this methodical and intensive investigation. They're going to provide information on what they know instead of what they don't. Nothing here will be speculative. It will all be fact. Please understand, too, that there will be some images of violence. There will be some profanity and things of that nature, so viewer discretion is advised. So without any further ado, please allow me to turn this over to Superintendent Doug Carter of the Indiana State Police. Thank you.
What you won't hear is what was presented to the grand jury because we don't know. Both Lieutenant Herron and I, neither one of us were a part of that grand jury. But the law does allow us to tell you what our investigation has shown. So while this is a bit of an extraordinary circumstance, for us to do it this way, we're living in extraordinary times. Captain Gallivis talked about what you're about to see. Please remember the human side of what you're about to see, both from the perspective of the IMPD and of the family and friends of Dreasjon Reed. I hope you'll look at this as objectively as we have, and that maybe you'll be able to very, very clearly quantify objectivity after you hear and see what you're about to hear and see from Lieutenant Herron. I'll scream from the highest mountaintop to anybody that'll listen about the quality of this work product and what's been done. I am so very grateful to our detectives and all the people that were involved in this process. And again, those aren't just simple words from me. The community, the city of Indianapolis deserves to know the facts. So please don't ask us to speculate because we won't. But we will be here to interact with you. This is going to take about 30 minutes probably. And you can make the decision about what you might air publicly after you see what you're about to see. Lieutenant Jeff Herron has been around the department more than almost 35 years. And he is the go-to guy for me. I keep him on speed dial, and he's the guy that has so much experience. And I think you'll also be able to see the quality of this individual and of this human being, because again, our job is to provide answers, not to come up with a subjective opinion. So with that being said, Lieutenant Jeff Herron.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. So I'm going to give you an overview of the case. Again, I was not part of the grand jury, so I was not in the room when the witnesses were speaking. So let's talk about the investigation. So as you all know, May 6, 2020, approximately 1800 or 6 p.m., we have Chief Taylor from IMPD and Deputy Chief Adams from IMPD. They are northbound on I-65 when Chief Adams observes a vehicle, a dark-colored Toyota passenger car, in his rearview mirror appear to run a vehicle off the road. He tries to stop that vehicle, activates his lights, and the vehicle doesn't stop. They go northbound on I-65, where they get off on the 38th Street collector, and ultimately the pursuit starts and it goes northbound on Guyan Road until it's taken over by the district IMPD officers. This is basically the timeline of the pursuit. Again, it starts at 6 p.m. and from the beginning of the actual pursuit to the shots fired is 6:16 p.m., so 16 minutes in the entire timeline. This is basically the route. The pursuit starts down here on I-65, gets up on 38th Street, and goes north on Guyan Road. This is actually the route of the pursuit. The yellow line would indicate the actual pursuit route, and then the green line would actually indicate where Officer Mercer, where the pursuit was terminated, and Officer Mercer continued to follow Mr. Reed's vehicle. Okay? So what happens basically is during the pursuit, Mr. Reed, his driving is so erratic that the officers believe that he's a danger to life and property, and so they disregard the pursuit. IMPD's policy is, even though they disregard the pursuit, they can continue to follow the vehicle that they were pursuing as long as they are obeying the traffic laws. In this particular case, Mr. Reed slowed down and began to obey the traffic laws, and he was followed by Officer Mercer. So orientate you to this map. This is the actual scene. This is Michigan Road. This is 62nd Street. What you're going to see here in a minute is that Mr. Reed's vehicle comes in, pulls behind what we call the ace lock and key, parks his vehicle, gets out, runs across the street and down the sidewalk here. Officer Mercer pulls into the parking lot, pulls behind the building, exits his vehicle, and does a foot pursuit after Mr. Reed. Obviously, Mr. Reed, I think you all know that Mr. Reed was live streaming this, and that entire live stream is 1 hour and 9 minutes from start to finish. What we did is if you're doing a live stream, you're basically, everything is reversed. So as you're live streaming it, what you're putting out is the reverse image. What we did is during our investigation is we had this actually flipped. And we cut that down to just an appropriate point, which was the 15 minutes and 30 seconds. IMPD did a very good job of their investigation. When, like I believe Ms. Curry said, when at all possible, we tried to go back to the source to get our information. And so as far as surveillance videos, we went back to the library, actually got the surveillance off of the library, the public library, we got it off of their server. Same thing with this, we've actually went back to the ace lock and key. Instead of using IMPD's copy, we actually went back and got it off of their server for ace lock and key. You're going to see the different camera angles. This camera angle here is what you're going to see Mr. Reed get out of his vehicle. And this one here, you actually see the intersection. Again, those are the other camera angles. And in this particular photograph here, this is Officer Mercer's vehicle. This is a compilation of the different videos. What you see here, again, to orientate you, this is 62nd Street, this is Michigan Road. Here in just a second, you're going to see Mr. Reed pull in to the parking lot of the ace lock and key right here. He's going to pull around back, park his vehicle, and get out and run. As he gets out, you're going to see him reach down on his waist. It's Officer Mercer pulling in. And running after Mr. Reed. This is going to fade out, and you're going to see camera 7 of the ace lock and key. It's going to show that sidewalk and the view of that as Officer Mercer up here in the corner is chasing Mr. Reed. We're going to see this image quite a few times later. We're going to enhance this. This is going to, we've synced this together. This is going to be Mr. Reed as he's getting out of his vehicle and running. This is going to be synced with him pulling up to the backside of the ace lock and key and slamming the door.
Come get my little bag! Please, come get me!
With radio traffic. We interposed the radio traffic from Officer Mercer over this.
I'm going. Please, come get me! What you say?
I give it. Hey, black number, black number,
Fuck you, Mom! Shit!
What are you fucking for? Who's actually shooting? Who's actually shooting? It's over going to be east of 62 in Michigan. He's armed, suspect is down, something in legs. Okay, police action, 62 Michigan, just east of 206.
In this next video here, you're going to see Mr. Reed, as he's running, his camera is going to pan down to his waistband, and you're going to see this image here. This is the rear sight of his pistol, which is a Glock. It has an aftermarket slide on it, which is yellow in color. This is the slide here. You're going to see that in comparison. We're going to show you a few more pictures of that in just a moment. Next image is stills from what we just saw. And when we slow it down, and you'll see again here in just a minute, you're going to see a drawing motion from Mr. Reed. And then what comes up here is this ultimately is the butt of a orange magazine, and you're going to see other images of that on his pistol. So you just saw him go down. He actually gets tased as he's beginning to draw. And he goes down on the sidewalk. And these are images of the barbs or the probes that are stuck in him. This is in the left shoulder. This is in the shorts. And what we have here is he doesn't get a complete circuit. So in a taser, you basically get a probe in each area, and then between there you get the electric wave that locks up the body. In this particular case, he gets an intermittent tase. Eyewitnesses. We had quite a few that we interviewed. We obtained them all on Michigan Street from the stoplight, both going north and south. So part of my job as a supervisor investigation is to look at all the different evidence. One of the things that I had done is had the acoustics analyzed from the shots fired by one of our experts. The other things we did, of course, we secured the library footage and then had that in a format where we can view it, which you're seeing now. Same thing with the ace lock and key. So the library, this is what the surveillance video really shows, and then this is us enhancing it. And so again, this is roughly over 100 yards. And this is what we do is try to enhance it the best we can. Obviously, it's pixelated, but that's what we have to work with. Again, ace lock and key provided their video evidence, and then we enhanced that. Again, this is what you saw a minute ago from a distance from camera 7. This is the enhanced version. You're going to see several more slides of that. And to point out here, Officer Mercer, Mr. Reed. Okay, so when Mr. Reed gets tased, he falls down on the sidewalk and his phone goes skipping out in front of him. Actually, he has two phones. One lands face up and it captures casings and dirt going through the air. That's real time. This is 20%. You're going to hear the shots fired and you're going to see casings on the screen. We'll enhance those a little bit in just a bit. See the metallic silver objects going across? Those are casings. This is what I explained a little bit ago, how we're talking about the mirror image and we had that flip so we can orientate and understand it. So So this is this audio graph that I was talking about. And so each one of these is a shot fired, and roughly these are about 0.4 of a second apart. And what we have, and we've done quite a few experiments, is you get the cadence of an officer involved in a gunfight is about 1/4 to a ½ second per round. And you can pretty much see that cadence here. When we get to 4 and 5, we see that's closed, that gap's closed, and we get to 6. If you would have listened to those shots fired when it was 20%, you would have only heard 14 shots. There were a total of 15 casings found at the scene. There was a total of 15 rounds fired. In shots 6 and 7, they're overlapping. What I mean overlapping, so if we were capping together and we were keeping cadence with each other, one of us is going to be slightly off. And so we examine that. I'm going to get into that in just a bit. This is that overlapping, that abrupt. Again, this is 6 and 7. So you get that wave pattern of one shot, and then you immediately, just in the milliseconds, get that second shot at the same time. And then this is the shots being fired, and the overlapping casings as they're going across the screen. We'll come back to those two shots here in just a second. So part of what we did is enhance that, blow that up. This is the casings going through the air, and then the metallic glint as they go through the air. So this is camera 7 again, and we're showing where camera 7 is, and then we're showing again Officer Mercer, Mr. Reed, running down the sidewalk. This is slowed down. Mr. Reed go down. Officer Mercer distance and moves in a southern direction and then ultimately in a easterly direction. This is camera 7 zoom with the live stream synced.
What you say? Stop there! Fuck you and mom!
And then zoomed. So Mr. Reed's firearm. So this is an image of his firearm. When I talked earlier about this orange butt plate of the magazine, that's what you're seeing on the screen. We talked about it earlier, about the slide, the yellow slide, the rear sight. That's what we compared it to. These are different images that we looked from, again, his Facebook Live feed. We broke down image by image. This is Mr. Reed in his vehicle with the pistol tucked up under his leg. This is the pistol. Comparing it to, this is those images we talked earlier, drawing, showing this portion of the buttstock of his magazine. There again, the comparison side by side. So, this is Mr. Reed's pistol laying on the ground. It's a little ways from his hand. And what we found out in our interviews with the officers is one of the officers, and I'll show you here in just a minute, comes up after the shooting. They've called for a medic. It's IMPD's policy. It's also IFD, and their EMT's policy is the EMTs will not respond when the suspect still has a firearm in his hand. So their policy is to move it out of his reach, and that's what the officer does here. And this is actually picture enhanced from the library. And what we have here is this is motion activated. So when I actually play this, you're going to get a skip. It's designed to pick up objects in the parking lot, and these objects are obviously extremely far away from this. So this will skip, and what you will see is Officer Biggers. The action's already happened. Shots have already been fired. Officer Mercer is walking off screen, and Officer Biggers is standing over. He bends down and moves the firearm. This is what you're going to see here. And that's why the skip is. Okay, we're going back to the crime scene here again. This is Mr. Reed's vehicle, Officer Mercer's vehicle. Route of pursuit, foot pursuit, ends up over here. Just walking through the crime scene. This is a shot facing to the eastbound. Mr. Mercer is over, Mr. Reed is over here down that eastbound. This is facing back to your west. This is your ace lock and key. Mr. Reed put his firearm and phone on the sidewalk here. Talked about the phones. There's the picture of the phones. This particular one is the one that was recording. It landed face up. So other things we did, of course, DNA evidence. Firearms were submitted for DNA analysis. The DNA came back as one in more than 333 billion unrelated individuals, meaning it is Dreasjon Reed's DNA on that pistol. Firearm analysis. So we obtained the firearm from IMPD. One of the things, the serial number was scratched off. We had our lab folks restore that serial number. We did a trace on that. We found that that pistol was obtained by Mr. Reed from a pawn shop in Texas. The other thing we did is submit the firearm to our laboratory for ballistics testing, as well as the 15 spent casings that were found at the scene. Those were ballistically checked. 2 casings near Mr. Reed's body came back to Mr. Reed's pistol. 1 casing was found in his vehicle, which matched his pistol also. There were additional 13 other casings that were recovered from the scene, and those were ballistically matched to Officer Mercer's firearm. I think we're going to have a lot of questions here. Be happy to answer anything you folks have.
So then based on the evidence that you just provided, the idea is that Dreasjon fired twice at Officer Mercer?
So, very good question. I'm glad you asked that. So going back to it, so the audio evidence you saw is that at the almost exact same time, we know that 2 shots were fired. That can't happen unless 2 different shooters are shooting. Casings crossing in the air can't happen unless you have two different pistols firing. There were 13 spent casings from Officer Mercer's firearm, and there were 2 from Mr. Reed's firearm, which ballistically matched his pistol. We know that Mr. Reed was in possession of a pistol. He had it in the vehicle. You saw the different captures of that pistol in his possession in the vehicle, and he had it as he was running down the sidewalk. The other thing is you saw, maybe not have caught it, but Mr. Reed actually goes face down on the sidewalk, and then his position is quite a bit different from where he was, with his final rest position was. And part of what we did is we actually hired a ballistics expert and a gunshot or a shooting reconstructionist and a trajectory expert, which would show and did show, I didn't put those in the slides here, which showed and did show that Mr. Reed was turning and was facing Officer Mercer at the times he was shot. Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
When after the taser was fired and the circuit didn't connect, how sure were you guys that the Officer Mercer didn't fire before Reed fired? Can you walk us through that?
couldn't quite understand you because you have your mask on. I apologize. The issue of COVID. Okay, but go ahead. Could you repeat it just one more time?
Yeah. So when the officer fired the taser, it didn't create that circuit to work.
Right.
How did you guys? Can you talk to me about the evidence that who shot first? Like, are you certain that Dreasjon didn't shoot or that the officer didn't shoot at Dreasjon first and returned fire?
So your question is could we determine what sequence of shots were fired and by who?
Yeah.
I don't think we can, definitively. Yeah. What we can say is that, I think definitively we can say that Mr. Reed fired 2 shots at the scene. Yes, ma'am.
You showed the cadence of the 2 streams of shooting.
Yes.
Why was there a gap in time?
Oh, so when you're talking about, so you hear shots, and then there's a period, there's a gap, and then you hear the 2 additional shots. That entire exchange, from very start to very finish, was a little less than 8 seconds. That entire thing was a little less than 8 seconds. From all of the shots to those last 2 seconds, there's about a 2-second pause, even though it seemed like forever because we've slowed it way down on there. There's about a 2-second pause. I don't want to speculate. It is what it is. Our ballistics person and our trajectory person said that up until final rest, Mr. Reed was still moving. Yes, sir.
Your officers are trained in deadly force tactics. In a situation like this arises, can you explain the threat that Reed posed to the officer, not only in evading, but also having a gun, possessing a gun, and why it was the officer did choose to shoot?
Okay, well, that's a complex question here. So if I can restate it just a second.
Sure.
So what you're saying is a person in possession of a firearm who's being chased, what is the threat to the officer? Okay, we know, study after study, training after training, is that a person who is in possession of a pistol can pull that, action is faster than reaction, that they can literally grab that firearm, turn and fire faster than an officer can process that, can say, okay, I have a threat, I need to pull my firearm, and so action is faster than reaction. And so our officers are trained that. What happens here is it looks like, well, it is, Officer Mercer, instead of using his firearm, he is pulling his taser out, he actually tases him at the same time that Mr. Reed is actually starting to pull his firearm out. And again, this would be speculation at this point a little bit. The taser appears to have saved Officer Mercer's life because it had an effect. Mr. Reed goes down. It's just it's a short, he's still operational, and then in turn, he is now obviously firing his weapon. But I don't know who fired first. Is there a way to determine who fired first? Not that I'm aware of. We hired ballistics experts from out of the state that travel all over the country, testifying and training, and I don't believe that's possible.
But when he's firing the taser, when officer is firing the taser, at the same time Mr. Reed is firing his gun, that's happening?
No, that does not appear from the evidence. What we're seeing is he, meaning Officer Mercer, fires his taser at the time Mr. Reed is starting to draw.
Okay. But we don't know who fired them, who fired?
Do not know. No.
So based off that, would Mr. Reed have fired his gun after the taser was pulled?
Okay, so you're asking me if Mr. Reed would have fired after the taser was pulled. The answer to that is, I think it's obvious. Obviously, he did fire after the taser. It's sequential. The taser was deployed, and then the shots were fired after that. Did that answer your question?
So he did not fire before the taser was pulled?
Yeah, yes, he did not. Mr. Reed did not fire before the taser was deployed. Yes.
And he fired twice. Mr. Reed fired twice. That's what was determined?
Yes, ballistic evidence, spent casings at the scene, and audio evidence would indicate that he fired twice.
And the officer fired 13 times?
That's correct, yes.
Was there any residue on Mr. Reed's hands?
You're going to have to, sorry.
Was there any residue on Mr. Reed's hands from gunfire?
So we, state police, nor do many agencies in the country do gunshot residue. It becomes a false positive quite often. If you fired that gun a month ago and then you touch it, it's still, we know he was in possession of the gun, so he's going to get gunshot residue on his hand regardless just by touching the firearm. There's also false positives if you're in the automotive industry, brake lining dust and things like that also give you a false positive. So it's not a reliable test. We don't do it.
We saw those shell casings flying in the air. It looks like they
can't answer that question. No, I don't know the answer to that.
We don't know.
Yeah.
When was Mr. Reed shot?
So, again, without referring back to the autopsy report, I'm going to let the pathologist release their report and everything else. However, he received a few shots to the left arm, left shoulder area. He received a shot to the leg, and then received shots to the head and to the back of the neck. And there's a few others there I didn't mention. Again, I'll refer that off to the pathologist. Several of the shots were either to the side or front to back, meaning going in the front and coming out the back. And there were shots from back to front.
Following the deadly shooting, were there any rounds left in Reed's gun for the officers?
Were there still live cartridges in Mr. Reed's gun? Yes.
In both?
Yes. Yes.
And when Mr. Reed is drawing, is he down at that point and turning, or what is his position as he's drawing?
So I'm not that expert. However, obviously we did the investigation and received the report on that. So Mr. Reed goes down basically on his stomach, and then he turns basically in that same position onto his buttocks, and he follows. It appears he follows Officer Mercer as he's moving.
And he's drawing as he's turning?
So he goes down. He's starting to draw as he's going down. He lays down, and then he starts to come and turn, and then ultimately gets up in kind of almost a sitting posture, and then is facing Officer Mercer and tracks him, is what our expert findings were.
So he's sitting and firing?
That's a good analogy.
So when do you fell backwards instead of face forward?
No, you can fall face down and simply roll and then get up on your buttocks.
And he fell face down because he was getting tased, is that what we're saying?
Well, that's what the evidence showed, yes.
Detective, you mentioned there's a few things that that you just can't say, such as which the casings, whose cases were,
Right.
who fired first.
Right.
I mean, when you have those kind of unknowns, why are you so confident on everything else in terms of like the audio evidence and the video evidence being merged together?
So your question is why are we confident in the crossing of the casings, and can we not tell? I'm not the guy to do that. Okay, so I don't. Again, I try not to speculate.
You have pieces that you just can't know what happened. You have other pieces that you feel is what happened.
I think that's a fair yes. I mean, yeah.
But I mean, do you need everything?
I think it's a
all parts of this to know what happened.
I think it's a totality of the evidence. I think a reasonable person could view all this and make their own decision on that.
And then in regards to the audio evidence, was that something that was done here, or was that were there other experts brought in to?
So we did it in-house, meaning the Indiana State Police, and we had it verified by other experts, national experts.
Keep in mind, Lieutenant Harris said, it's impossible for those rounds to cross unless they're being fired by two pistols. And that's really important. I think what we've seen and heard so far is this isn't a subjective opinion about what happened. I think you were able to articulate not every single fact that we hope we never will be able to, but those kinds of events have led us to the position that we found ourselves in today. So please don't lose sight of that. The sound that he explained, again, that supports the theory of being fired by two guns and two pistols at the same time. Okay?
Did the Indiana State Police ever determine the origin of that gun?
Yes, like I stated a little bit ago, we did a serial number restoration. We tracked that gun down to a pawn shop in Texas, and that's where Mr. Reed obtained possession of it.
How did he obtain possession of it?
He stole it.
Earlier, I thought you said it was from a pawn shop. Did he steal it from a pawn
He
shop?
stole it from a pawn shop. But I can go into specifics of that. So one of the things we did, of course, to track that back, we actually got the report, the actual police report from that pawn shop, and we got the still images from their surveillance video of him taking that gun. And basically how that happened is he asked to see that firearm. The clerk puts it out on a counter. He actually takes his own phone, takes a picture of it, and then grabs it and runs out the door.
Forgive me if this has been answered. Was there a toxicology report during the autopsy?
There was, but that was by the pathologist, and I'll let them comment on that.
Is this video going to be released online on the website for a safe place so other people can view it?
I will work with our PAO, and we'll see about the release of that. And I can't give it to you tonight. I apologize. I don't have that set up.
Well, I imagine people in the public are going to be very interested in how much the media can explain versus what we all saw here.
Certainly, yeah.
Is that stolen gun been linked to any other funds?
The question was, has that stolen gun been linked to?
Any other funds?
Yes, it has.
Can you explain that?
Could you elaborate?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So part of our job, obviously, is to try to get an entire picture of what occurred. And in our analysis of Mr. Reed's phone, we found a text thread of him indicating that he did a couple, meaning 2, other drive-by shootings. In that text thread, we were able to figure out the date and roughly time of that. And then we were able to go back to IMPD, ask them for all reports of drive-by shootings at that time, and if they had collected evidence. We found there were 2 reports taken, and that they had those casings still in their evidence. We obtained those casings, took them to our firearms section, and matched those ballistically to Mr. Reed's pistol.
Either of those incidents involve injuries or death?
No. Anything else? All right. Thank you, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our press conference for this evening. Thank you very much for your attendance. Please be safe in your travels this evening. Be safe and well.